I just have some brief introductory remarks that I will make before I turn it over to Chris and Daniel, and of course the rest of you panelists. Let me thank first of all Fordham University, especially Maria, Dr. Shea, Tiffany Molina, and Kayla Backus, who have really been supporting, organizing this seminar, in addition with, of course, Catholic Concern for Animals. And I also want to thank all the people who are registered as guests to participate, which I hope will lead to future collaborations. And let me indulge you a little bit with my, excuse me, how I kind of came around to this. I'm sorry about my hoarseness, but my first encounter with this was with Franciscan spirituality was in 2022, when I was reading Live Like Francis. And if you're familiar with the book, you know that there is every week there's a reflection. And the reflection on week 41 is care for creation. And there's a quote in there: moreover, they should respect all creatures, animate and inanimate, which bear the imprint, thank you, of the Most High. Anyway, that quote also has some questions in that, which also I'm still dealing with them. How do you understand universal kinship as important to your life? What one thing can you do differently to preserve or restore a bit of creation? I'm still working on those questions. I'm a vegan, I'm a Catholic. I try to help the earth and embrace my kinship with non-human animals. And I think that there are things that we can do to restore a bit of creation. We can promote animal compassion as integral to Catholic social teaching, Catholic schools. We can develop special events on humane education and plant-based diets during the birthday of St. Francis of Assisi, as well as other saints that were vegetarians. And we can publish vegan diet booklets that illustrate the benefits of non-human animals that could be distributed to congregations during the liturgical year and on days like Earth Day. We can do all these things. But the idea of organizing the webinar was ignited by an article that appeared in the National Catholic Reporter on May 23rd. It was called "With Laudato Si, Pope Francis Firmly Planted Ecology into Catholic Social Teaching." There were two theologians there who were discussing it: Celia Dean Drummond, director of Laudato Si Research Institute at Oxford, and Erin Lowe, I hope I pronounced her name correctly, an assistant professor of theology at the College of St. Elizabeth in New Jersey. They noted that to fulfill the promise of Pope Francis Laudato Si, we need something like 10 commandments for the care of creation. So that got me thinking. The idea of thinking about commandments for the care of creation captured my imagination. Right? My thoughts turned to organizing a webinar that could be used as a forum to thinking about this. So besides Living Like Francis, which I read in 2022, as I talked about earlier, I wanted to learn more about spiritual teachings that could be shared with Catholics and others to explore the idea of care for creation. And that happened on a weekday in early June. I happened to visit the Workers' Chapel at St. Francis of Assisi Church in Manhattan for quiet prayer. After praying, I visited the bookstore. And there I found Care for Creation, Franciscan Spirituality of the Earth by Elia Delio, Keith Douglas Warner, and Pamela Wood. And looking through that book, I realized, there's a lot more here that we can work with. Looking for additional inspiration, I drew from spiritual nourishment from the decision by Pope Leo XIV recently to celebrate the inaugural Mass for the Care of Creation. And among the statements which resonated with me when I checked that out was I would like to add that we should pray for the conversion of the many people inside and outside the church who do not yet recognize the urgent need to care for our common home. And our mission is to care for creation, to foster peace and reconciliation. Is Jesus' own mission, the mission that the Lord entrusts to us. We hear the cry of the earth and we hear the cry of the poor because this plea has reached the heart of God. Our indignation is his indignation. Our work is his work. So as I was thinking through that, I came up with some topics which I think can provide some context for today's discussion, which of course is going to be delving into these areas. Care for creation. A lot of people don't know that, Genesis, humans are commanded to care for creation. Matthew, God loves and cares for all creation. I created a slide which has about 15 different ones that appear in Catholic social teaching. The article, of course, by Carol Gratz in the National Catholic Reporter, it poses a challenge. What's the best way for us to have a clear understanding of what we need to do, to have a sort of 10 commandments for care of creation? Animal suffering. My wife, who's my moral conscience, okay, she's my moral conscience. And she's telling me, Bill, what are you going to be talking to these people about and not talking about animal suffering? What the hell's wrong with you? So, and she's got a point. She has a point. So, for example, one of the things I happened to look at something that National Anti-Vivisection Society put together recently. It's the first time that the United States Department of Agriculture is actually counting the animals used in research. 88,872. That's an amazing thing when you think about it. And the fact that the Animal Welfare Act doesn't include certain animals. They don't even count from perspective of people looking into this area. So then I thought about what about the fruits of the Holy Spirit? What can they help me with? So I got into gentleness. I mean, there are more fruits. How can humility help us to advocate for animals? Love. How does God figure in protecting animals from abuse? Patience. How do we stay motivated to work and encourage others to support animal compassion? And then I got to the examination of conscience, which of course is a negation thing. But do I pray for the forgiveness of sins between humans and the created world and for the healing and reconciliation of our broken relationship with creation? How do I resolve that? So the Care for Creation webinar has two great speakers, Chris Fagan, the Executive Director of Catholic Concern for Animals, and Daniel Mascarenhas, the Jesuit scholastic, studying to be a Catholic priest. Their work demonstrates to me a commitment to protecting animals from the abusive practices of farming, entertainment, medical research. They're the pilgrims of hope within the Catholic Church. We're fortunate to also have an excellent group of participants that will share your unique insights and experiences on how we can improve our care for creation. Now, let me say the last thing here before I turn it over to Chris and Daniel. Recently, I came across the 10 Green Commandments of Laudato Si by Father Jostrom Isaac Carisadam. I hope I pronounced his name right. It was published in the Liturgical Press in 2019. And in there are 10 commandments. I'm not going to go through all of them, but for example, earth, our common home, is in peril. Take care of it. That's commandment number 1. Recognize abuse of creation as ecological sin. That's commandment number 4. And also commandment number 10, care for our common home by cultivating the ecological virtues of praise, gratitude, care, justice, work, sobriety, and humility. But what struck me about it is I read through the 224 pages booklet, and I guess I didn't see enough care for non-human animals and making sure their interests are represented when we talk about this. And so that's kind of where I would leave it with. I said that, we have two great speakers going to take us on this journey, and we hope that it will lead to future collaborations with all of you. And thank you for your patience. Chris?
Thank you, William. That was a wonderful introduction thanks for all you have done. I'll speak about that a little bit later when I make my contribution. But at this point, I'd like to say thank you for all you have done in putting this webinar together with Fordham. And I think the plan, and I use the word think, I think the plan is that Daniel will speak first and do his presentation, then I will do mine, and then we'll have a Q&A section, and we've got very senior representatives from very big organizations with us as well, and obviously all our people who have signed up as registered to attend. So we'll have a good Q&A session. We may need what they call a comfort break at some point, I guess, but I think the plan now is for Daniel to speak, and then we'll see where we are from there regarding a little break, and then Q&A session, if that is how you want to handle it.
That's fine. It's great. Take it away, Daniel.
Sounds good. Could I get the permission to share my screen?
Yes. Give me 1 second. Are you able to now?
No, it's saying sharing is not turned on. Oh, I think it's done now. Thank you.
Yes. Okay.
Great. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes,
Thank you, William, for your introduction. Now, I'm not a Franciscan, I'm a Jesuit, so I hope I'm not stepping out of my bounds, but in typical Jesuit fashion, we like to get into things that is not none of our business. But I'm happy to be invited here to talk about a topic that's very close to my heart. I have a few slides. I think I have about 15 minutes. So I'll try to keep track of time. About care for God's creatures in the Catholic tradition. So I'll talk mainly about Laudato Si because that's what brought us together here. It's the 10-year anniversary as well. And I'll also talk about the Bible a little bit. As Catholics, I think we should read the Bible a little more often. So those are the two topics I'll cover. So first, about Laudato Si. So it's been 10 years since Laudato Si has come out. And a lot of focus has been on energy production. So a lot of churches and Catholic institutions have talked about solar panels and so on. And that's wonderful, and recycling, which is great. But there's not much talk about animal agriculture, especially factory farming. And I want to talk about that because in terms of care for creation, it is one of the biggest topics we need to talk about because of the amount of pollution, air, land, and water that's used for animal agriculture. Also, animal cruelty. If we talk about creation, creation involves creatures. And so if we are going to care for creation, we should also care for creatures. And unjust labor conditions, the idea that the poor and the marginalized have to work in horrendous conditions, suffering physical and mental injuries when they are involved in slaughter of animals. So I feel like there will be more emphasis on animals and animal farming in general as we talk about Laudato Si. The other critique I have about Laudato Si, or at least the way it's received, I don't know if Pope Francis intended it that way, but the way it is received is we often talk about all of non-human creation as Mother Earth. So unceremoniously, everything, animals, plants, birds, insects, rocks, rivers, everything is considered as Mother Earth. But I think from a philosophical standpoint, each of these entities have a different moral standing, right? In the sense that they are sentient or they are valuable in their own way. So I think the idea that Mother Earth sort of covers everything for me it's a little unsettling. So I want to focus on animals and not just Mother Earth in general. A little bit on my story. I was not really involved in this for many years of my life until when I was studying philosophy in St. Louis. A student asked me one time, how can I, as a Catholic and a professed disciple of Christ, I was wearing clerics, so he came and asked me, you're a seminarian, you're a disciple of Christ, and how can you, who is a disciple of Christ, the Prince of Peace, how can I participate in something that's so cruel and violent, right? The meat industry is inherently violent. And so he made me think about what it means to be a disciple of Christ, the idea of compassion and kindness for everyone. And if I claim to be a disciple of Christ, what does that mean in terms of animals? And so the idea of love God and love all of God's creatures. So what would that mean? And so I looked into what it would mean. What does the Catholic Church say about our relationship with animals? And so I have a few notes from that I'll cover in this talk. So first, Laudato Si. I have a few quotations that I will talk about, and then we'll go from there. So in number 21, Pope Francis talks about the earth, our home, is beginning to look more and more like an immense pile of filth. So a lot of trash, dirt. And I got this quotation from a paper, an academic paper by Brian Henning, who's a professor at Gonzaga. He says, each steer deposits about 50 pounds of urine and manure every day. It's dumped into pits, gigantic pools of pee and poop that the industry calls lagoons. Slaughterhouse lagoons can be as big as 20 acres and as much as 15 feet deep, filled with millions of gallons of really disgusting stuff. Now, I don't want to talk about how disgusting it is, but Ignatian imagination, this is a lot. Now, this is just one slaughterhouse, right? When you have millions of animals in captivity, they also produce a lot of waste. And so the immense pile of filth that Pope Francis is talking about is actually a lot of it is from factory farms. We don't see it because it's hidden away, but it does affect our lives every time there's some sort of leakage into the groundwater, or if there's a flood or a hurricane, especially in states like North Carolina, it overflows into lakes and rivers. And so factory farming is quite produces a lot of filth. And this is also not talking about slaughterhouses, because you have waste from animals there as well. Another quotation, number 33, he says, "It's not enough to think about different species merely as potential resources to be exploited, while overlooking the fact that they have value in themselves." Similarly, in 83, he says, "The ultimate purpose of other creatures is not to be found in us." So the idea that creation is not about utility, right? It's not about what we can get out of creation or out of animals or other creatures. The idea in Psalm 145, we have, "All your works give you thanks, Lord, and your faithful bless you." So the idea is that all of creation, including animals, are there to praise God, right? And so it's not about how much utility we can get from them, but the idea is how can we join with them, with other creatures, in praising God. And that's the idea of moving the focus away from us and towards creation, such that we are all giving praise to God in our own way. So that's, I think, what Pope Francis is getting at in number 33. In number 92, Pope Francis says, "We have only one heart, and the same wretchedness which leads us to mistreat an animal will not be long in showing itself in our relationships with other people. Every act of cruelty towards any creature is contrary to human dignity." That last sentence is actually from the Catechism. So Pope Francis is quoting the Catechism in that. So the idea is that this is a little focus on humans, but the idea is also from Thomas Aquinas, is that if we as humans are cruel to other creatures, it affects who we are. It stains our soul. And so when we are cruel towards animals, it affects our character. And so then we will become cruel towards other humans. And now most of us are obviously not being cruel to animals ourselves. We are only purchasing cruelty products, right? Not most of us are not slaughtering animals. But I got this quotation from Matthew Scully, who says, "The only thing worse than cruelty is delegated cruelty," meaning we are paying other people to do the dirty work on our behalf. So in some ways, I think we can see that by paying someone else to be cruel, we are being cruel ourselves. And that is what will affect our character, as Thomas Aquinas, Pope Francis, and the Catechism also says the same thing. A few more quotations. So in number 241, okay, I guess I forgot to put this one in line. But anyways, in 241, just as Mary's pierced heart mourned the death of Jesus, so now she grieves for the sufferings of the crucified poor and for the creatures of this world laid waste by human power. When I read this sentence, I mean, it immediately stood out to me that, well, most of the creatures that are laid waste by human power are on factory farms. I mean, there are more animals on factory farms than there are in the wild, right? And so most of the animals who are suffering because of human human action. Okay, sorry for the out of order there. Number 67, Pope Francis says, "We must reject the notion of being given dominion justifies absolute domination over other creatures." So the idea is that, yeah, we are given dominion. Genesis chapter 1, it's often used to say that humans are given dominion. But the idea is that if we are given dominion, we should think about what Christ would talk about dominion, right? The idea of the kingship of Christ. So when Christ talks about his kingdom and his kingship, it's always about compassion and service. It's not about domination. It's not about getting what we want. It's about serving others. So I think we can have the idea of dominion. I'm not against the idea of dominion, but I think the idea of dominion needs to be seen through the lens of the kingship of Christ. In number 105, Pope Francis says, "Our freedom fades when it is handed over to the blind forces of the unconscious, of immediate needs, of self-interest, and of violence." So the idea of freedom is, I mean, I don't know, this is a largely American audience, but in America, freedom is a very big deal. We always talk about our freedom, and we don't want anybody to take away any of our freedom. So when I talk about not eating meat, people will often say, oh, you don't like, we shouldn't be telling others what to do. We should have all the options available. But that's not the idea of freedom in the Catholic context. So Thomas Aquinas talks about the freedom of indifference versus the freedom of excellence. So the freedom of indifference is what we have in America, meaning don't tell me what to do. I need to have all the options all the time, and I can choose whatever I want without any constraints. But in the Catholic tradition, we have the idea of freedom of excellence. The idea is that freedom is not an end in itself. Freedom is not a good for its own sake. Freedom is such that it enables us to live excellently. So we should always have the option to do the good. So freedom is an agent, or is something that we use to achieve the good. And so if cruelty products are taken away from us, it doesn't infringe on our freedom. Because if we want to be excellent, we will not choose cruelty products. So the idea of freedom is about doing the good, achieving excellence. And so Pope Francis also says our freedom has kind of become the idea of like, it's always about self-interest. I need to be able to do what I want, what will give me pleasure. And that's not the idea of freedom in the Catholic tradition. In number 208, Pope Francis says, we're always capable of going out of ourselves towards the other. Unless we do this, other creatures will not be recognized for their true worth. We are unconcerned about caring for things for the sake of others. This is so fundamental, the idea of caring for things for the sake of the other, because that basically echoes the definition of love in the Catholic tradition. So in the Catholic tradition, again from Thomas Aquinas, love wills the good of the other for their sake. So we want good for the other creature for their own sake. So it's not about utility for me. It's about what is good for the other and how I can enable the other creature or the other person achieve the good. That's the idea of love. And so if we love God's creation, we will think about what is good for each of God's creature and see how we can help them achieve the good. Not for our sake, but for their sake. Like this is so foundational. So it's not about utility, it's about enabling the other to achieve the good. And that's the definition of love in the Catholic tradition. The last quotation I'll talk about here is number 211. There is a nobility in the duty to care for creation through little daily actions. And it is wonderful how education can bring about real changes in lifestyle. Lots of different things highlighted here, the idea of virtue ethics. So the sense that every little bit that you do changes who you are. So small actions matter because it affects your character. The more you practice small actions, the stronger you will become and you will be able to do bigger actions. So that's the idea. Every bit matters, the age-old wisdom, every drop makes the mighty ocean, right? So what you do matters. No matter what other people are doing or not doing, but what you do, every little bit matters. It helps you avoid anxiety because it gives you a sense of agency. Because you are doing something, even if the world is going to hell, it doesn't matter because you are doing something good. So it takes away anxiety and apathy because the big picture of the environment can be really stressful. But if you are doing something small, it gives you a sense of agency. Also, it makes us consistent. Pope Francis points out that we are not consistent. So if you preach care for creation and you are doing something, you are being consistent. So hopefully we can raise awareness and hopefully we can fight what I call as willed ignorance, meaning a lot of people don't want to know about these things because if they know, they will have to change. So we try to raise awareness as best as we can. So these are a few ideas from Laudato Si. I'll talk a little bit about the Bible. It's helpful to know, to have what we call like the lens of interpretation, the hermeneutics, right? How do we read the Bible? So first thing, all creation belongs to God, right? All creatures praise God by their existence. God invited humans to exercise dominion, but God is love. So this dominion that we are given as humans who are made in the image of God, this dominion has to be of God, meaning it has to be of love, compassion, and service. So that's the idea. That's how I read the Bible. And as I've shown on the screen, all of that comes from the Bible itself. How do we read the Bible? There's a lot in the Bible about creation and what we are supposed to do with it. I'll just hit a few main points. Genesis chapters 1 to 3, it talks about God's original intent. So God declares all of creation good even before humans come on the scene. So that means that that things are good or things are complete before we are on the scene. So it's not that their utility for us makes them useful or good. They are good on their own. So all of the creatures are good on their own. This is a big surprise for lots of Christians that God gave us plants to eat. This is Genesis chapter 1, verse 29. God actually intended us to be vegetarian before the fall. In the second creation story, God makes all of these animals as companions for Adam. So I hope as humans we will treat our companions well. In Isaiah chapter 11, the famous peaceable kingdom, it talks about the end times. So if Genesis is about the start, Isaiah 11 is about the end times, the eschaton, when all of God's creatures will live in harmony with each other. Now, I don't have time to talk about the fall and the flood and Exodus, but I would be happy to cover that in the Q&A if anyone has specific questions. Jesus himself, well, so Jesus was born among animals in the manger. So the idea is that God became human, not only for humans, but we can say God became a creature for all creatures. So Jesus was born among animals, right? And so he was incarnated for animals as well. Jesus often talked about the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God is about love, mercy, kindness, compassion. That's what Jesus talked about. Talks about reconciliation, living in right relationship with each other. That's the idea of peace. The Good Samaritan, the famous parable. How do we treat anybody who is suffering, anybody who is in need? Can we think about our neighbor also including animals? Because animals are capable of receiving love in their own way. So if a creature can receive love, how do we show them love? Something to think about. This unforgiving servant, my interpretation is slightly controversial. People have said it's a little bit of a fire and brimstone kind, but here goes. So we can think about, if you know the parable of the unforgiving servant, there is the king who forgives his head servant of some debt because the head servant was begging for mercy. Then the head servant goes and meets his lower servant, and he does not show mercy to his lower servant who is in debt. So then the king hears about this and he gets really angry with his head servant, right? So that's basically it. So we can think about God as the king, humans as the head servant, and animals as the lower servants. I'm completely fine with saying humans are above animals, but we ask God for mercy for our sins and for all the things we've done wrong. But then we don't go and show mercy to animals who are under our power. And they've not done anything wrong either. We are just treating them really badly, even though they've not done anything wrong. Animals don't owe us anything. So if we don't show mercy to those who are under us, animals, then perhaps God might not be too happy about us. I won't get into the argument of silence. I think I'm a little short of time here. Couple of things about Paul. Paul talks about idolatry, and he actually says, if eating meat causes my brother to sin, I will never eat meat again. This is, I think, chapter 8 of 1 Corinthians. The idea was that in Corinth, most of the meat was sourced from an offering to the idols. And so Paul was concerned that consuming such meat would harm the Christians. Now, we don't have people offering meat to idols in 21st century America or the world generally. But we can think about idolatry as false worship. So anything opposed to God's kingdom is idolatry. So if God's kingdom is about justice, love, mercy, kindness, then anything opposed to that, our factory farms are all opposed to that, right? They are not places of love, mercy, and kindness. So I think we could interpret the idea of idolatry as anything opposed to God's kingdom. A famous passage often brought up about eating meat is Peter's vision of animals. This is in Acts chapter 10. Just want to say briefly, this passage is not about eating meat. It's about Peter eating with the Gentiles. So Peter was against eating with the Gentiles. He wanted to keep Christianity among the Jewish people. So he had this vision where Peter's invited to go and eat with the Gentiles. So it's not about meat, it's about eating with the Gentiles. Just want to point that out. In my last slide, I already talked about the catechism, the idea that if we cause animals to suffer, it is not good for humans. I thought I'd put St. John Henry Newman there just because he was recently made a doctor of the church. So we can talk about what John Henry Newman had to say. So John Henry Newman compares Jesus' suffering to the suffering that animals go through. And this is really surprising because we don't want to compare Jesus to animals. I mean, I wouldn't do that, but John Henry Newman has done that. And it is what I take from it is that means animals do suffer, right? If John Henry Newman wants to compare animals, Jesus to animals, then the animals definitely suffer. And it is morally significant enough that John Henry Newman is able to compare Jesus' suffering to that of animals. And he says cruelty to animals is as if man did not love God. There's something so dreadful, so satanic in tormenting those who have never harmed us. So this is John Henry Newman talking about this more than 100 years back. And the last thing I'll talk about is at Mass. So if your priest chooses Eucharistic prayer 3 or 4, we do talk about other creatures in there, and we say that all of these other creatures give God praise, right? And we, as humans, are giving voice to other creatures in giving praise. So the idea that other creatures are also giving God praise when we gather at Mass, we are giving voice to other creatures. And so we can keep that in mind because in the Catholic tradition, we have this idea of lex orandi, lex credendi, and lex vivendi, which means that the law of what is prayed is what is believed, is what is lived. So what we pray, right? So we pray at Mass that all creatures give praise to God. So we pray that. That's what we believe, because that's what if we pray that, so that's what we believe. And after we believe something, we have to live that. So what does it mean to give voice to every creature under heaven and help them praise God? And that's not quite what happens in the way we treat animals in our world today. So that was a quick overview of some of the main points I wanted to cover. I will let the next speaker cover a few points. And if anything stood out to you, please feel free to ask questions. Thank you.
Do you want me to come on now, William?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Well, thanks for that. So, for those who don't know me, my name is Chris Fagan, and I'm the Chief Executive of Catholic Concern for Animals, often known by abbreviation as CCA, but we're Catholic Concern for Animals. And I first like to start my short contribution by thanking everyone for attending today, taking the time out of their busy day to attend this webinar, and also to express gratitude in particular to William and Daniel for their contributions and presentations so far, but also and for William for helping organise this. This wouldn't be taking place without William's work putting this together over recent times. But also to thank Fordham Jesuit University in New York City for hosting and doing the tech work today, and the staff who are here and the staff who have been with us previously have now moved on to another engagement. But so to thank Fordham as an institution, but also to thank the individuals who have worked hard and are working hard right now in putting this webinar on. So what I want to talk about today, not surprisingly, is Catholic Concern for Animals. And William has talked about his personal experiences and how he has come to think about the Catholic Church and its relationship with the non-human creation. And Daniel has given us an overview, a very good overview of Scripture and of Catholic social teaching, which in this regard is Laudato Si. Now, Laudato Si has been very important for the last 10 years since it was published and will continue to be so. But I want to talk about some of the practicalities of what Catholic Concern for Animals actually means. And the first thing I'm going to say is actually it stands for two things, which might surprise some people on the call. Clearly, Catholic Concern for Animals is an educational charity, which I'm the chief executive of, and which is registered in the UK with the Charities Commission here, but and works globally, and is in fact the Catholic voice, Catholic face of animal welfare throughout the world, of which we're very proud. And we have a good relationship with the Catholic clergy, and of course, including up to the Vatican. So we're very proud of that. But what I'm going to say, which might sound a bit more unfamiliar, and which might even perhaps be controversial, who can tell, is that I think actually the Catholic Concern for Animals, the words Catholic Concern for Animals, not as the institution or the organisation of charity, but the words Catholic Concern for Animals represent a philosophy and actually even a theology, if one thinks it through. So I'll just throw that out there because some people may find that unfamiliar. They may find it even challenging or controversial, but I'm just throwing it out there for what it's worth before I move on. So the first part of what I've just been talking about is perhaps easier to explain, which is the organisation, the charity Catholic Concern for Animals, of which I'm very proud to be the chief executive. And like all institutions nowadays, we have a website and we try to engage digitally, as we are doing indeed today. So the best way, I think, to introduce CCA for those who may not be familiar with us is quoting from that website, basically about what we are and what we do. So this is a quotation directly from the website, starting now. Our mission is the advancement of Christian respect and responsibility for the animal creation, with special reference to Catholic teaching and beliefs. Just a point on that, if you noticed what Daniel said earlier, Pope Francis talked about Christians, not only Catholics. And of course, Laudato Si was the first ever Catholic encyclical that was addressed to the whole world's population. So that's a key point that Pope Francis made. And we talk about advancement of Christian respect and responsibility for the animal creation, but with special reference to Catholic teaching and beliefs. Going back to our quote from the website, the charity meets its objectives of advancing Christian respect and responsibility for the animal creation through education and advocacy. And I'll come back to both of those things later on. And again, I think you've already seen some of it in some of the quotations Daniel made from Laudato Si. Our education and advocacy is both digitally and through face-to-face contact. Digitally, CCA promotes its work through its website, social media outreach, which is ever-changing, of course. One doesn't need to tell you on this call about the difficulties of trying to keep up with social media and its ever-changing activities. We also produce a regular newsletter and a members magazine, The Ark, which is now produced as in a members-only area on the website. The Ark used to be a very, very proud of it, actually. It used to be a paper product, like a journal, a magazine. Like, of course, in the modern world, those things have not quite as popular as they once were, and one needs to use digital resources more. And the Ark is now Ark Online, rather than the old-fashioned published Ark. That's sad in some ways, but we have to live with the times in which we live. The chief executive, me, promotes the work of the charity by engaging with other organisations to end animal cruelty. And I'm delighted that there are other organisations here with us today, because, you know, we as an animal advocacy family, if I can put it that way, need to work together across all sorts of animal advocacy, animal protection, animal rights issues. Nobody can do it alone. And I'm delighted we work with colleagues, and I'm delighted some of them are here on this webinar today. The charity, again from the website, the charity also supports animal rescues through its Global Animal Rescue Fund. And I am extremely proud of this because we support animal sanctuaries all across the world, sometimes in war zones, And and animals is an issue that I believe does not get enough discussion as it should. So we support animal charities throughout the world who make applications to us. And I'm very, very proud of that work. And if you look on our website, if you get a chance, you'll see a list of where we've given money and who we've given money to and what hopefully they have done with it. So that actually is helping animals on the ground in difficult circumstances. So we're not just an educational charity, which is our main remit. We're also actually doing our bit to help real animals in real difficult situations. And we're very, very proud of that. Going back to our website, the charity provides a public benefit by producing educational material and giving talks on the empathetic treatment of animals based on the teaching of the Catholic Church, which gives a moral benefit to the human community. Now that sounds quite high-minded, and I make no apologies for that. When one uses words like moral benefit to the human community, you could be accused of taking high ground, but I'm quite happy to try and deal with that issue. We are talking within the Catholic family elsewhere, so we do at least try to have some moral engagement on these issues. The charity has a high impact by informing and educating on the issues of animal advocacy among the Catholic world, population at all levels. And I'll repeat that. The Catholic world population at all levels. Catholic world population, 1.3 billion roughly at the moment. Varies depending on what figures you get, but around the 1.3 billion, maybe slightly higher. All levels from the Vatican as the Catholic Church's highest institution to individual Catholics throughout the world, wherever they are. And they're everywhere, frankly. They're absolutely everywhere. You cannot find, well, I challenge you to find anywhere on the globe where there's not a Catholic, even in Antarctic workstations and inhospitable places like the Antarctic, you will find Catholics working in there. So, and even in places where Christianity and Catholics in particular have been persecuted, there are still Catholics. So they're everywhere. And I've said that the charity also works with other animal advocacy organisations and individuals, colleagues, people who share our views and principles anywhere throughout the world that we can engage with them. And of course, the digital world makes that a lot easier than it was in the pre-digital scenario. So that is the basis of Catholic Concern for Animals in 2025. That is, as we sit here now, is what we are, what we do. However, a little bit of history. Catholic Concern for Animals, and this might surprise some, you don't know, is almost 100 years old. We'll hopefully celebrate our centenary in 2029. And that's quite an old organisation. There are organisations, of course, in animal advocacy who are older than us, but 100 years is we're very proud of that. It's a long time. If we get there, 5 years from now, 4 years from now, sorry, 4 years from now. And in that time, we've had a very interesting and varied history, as you would expect for an organisation that is 95 years old. And in 2019, we celebrated this. And I think some people on the call actually took part in the celebrations we had in London. And we published a booklet, a 90th birthday anniversary booklet, history booklet. And I'm very, very happy for people who are interested to send that, a PDF of that, to anybody who wants it. Very interesting. It covers 95 years. So there's lots of things in there that everybody knows. And it's fascinating, actually, the history of, like most organizational histories, you always find something you didn't know, anything you know the organization well. So I'm happy to send that if anyone wants to write to me and send a PDF of that free of charge. There we are, free of charge. Not offering you get something for nothing, but there we are. Now, clearly, I cannot cover 90. It was 90 years old when it was written. It's now 95 years since we were formed. I cannot cover that in this talk, and I wouldn't wish to try to. And anyway, I want to look forwards, not backwards. One of my key things is always to look to the present and tomorrow, not spend too much time looking backwards. But I would, with your indulgence, William and colleagues, read out to you what I actually wrote 5 years ago for that anniversary booklet. Again, being me, it was looking forward. So that I will just briefly read out what I actually wrote 5 years ago and see how it resonates today, 5 years later. And the article I wrote was, what does the future hold for CCA? And it'd be interesting to see what I'm writing now compared to what I wrote 5 years ago. And this is what I wrote 5 years ago. I think that the world as a whole and creation, both human and non-human, are facing two distinct and separate challenges. And these are the climate emergency and also rapid technological change. Absolutely fascinating that our new Pope has said technological change is the reason why he's taken the name of Leo, Pope Leo, based on his predecessor, Pope Leo XIII. Fascinating that he has taken that and said it's one of his main issues, technological change. So I was 5 years ahead of the game, I might claim, on this one. So I'm really pleased that though I said 5 years ago, the Pope is embracing the need to look at technological change. I do not, again, what I wrote then, I do not have a crystal ball in which to gaze, but I suspect that the changes which we will see in the next 10 years will be so rapid that we will scarcely keep up with them as the climate emergency intensifies and the growth of AI increasingly affects the lives of every human and indeed every living being on the planet. Again, I think those both have happened in the last 5 years and are continuing to happen. These big developments, I said, are out of the control of CCA, but we will continue our work to try and educate policymakers, institutions, individual Catholics, to try and avoid the worst case scenarios from the climate emergency. And we will try and harness the positives from new technology to continue to spread the CCA message to all corners of the world. CCA, I said, has embraced the internet in the last 5 years, and this has helped us to communicate with Catholics all over the planet via the website, social media platforms, in a way that the early pioneers of CCA could never have imagined. And we will continue to invest resources to ensure that we keep up to date with rapid technological change in communication systems that I have no doubt will continue to develop. I suspect, for example, that in 10 years' time, hardly anybody will be using Facebook anymore. I should have said Twitter, actually, but that's Facebook. Anymore, though at this moment in time, it remains a social media giant. And we are already, said this 5 years ago, starting to see email communications replaced by WhatsApp and other messaging services. So the world has changed up, in 5 years as we thought it would, and it will continue to get changed faster and faster. CCA has become a worldwide organization through new technology and digital communications, and we will continue to do so. But for example, will we see a hard copy of the Ark in 10 years? Well, we haven't seen it in 5 years, so I was correct on that one again. It's actually gone sooner than I anticipated, which of course some colleagues are upset about that they like the old printed copy, and I understand that. However, addressing that issue, face-to-face discussion and advocacy will not disappear, and we're doing it right now. And I am certain that in my own mind that over the last few years, CCA, this is where I'm pushing the organisation as its CEO, so I make no apologies. CCA has become the best known and most important faith-based animal advocacy organisation in Europe. That's what I said 5 years ago. We now build on that base to try and become the best known and most important faith-based animal advocacy organisation in the rest of the world. And we must never forget that the majority of Catholics live outside of Europe, and that they reside in Latin America, Africa, Asia, but also a large number in the North Americas. It is a sobering thought that over 250 million Catholics live in Brazil and Mexico alone. It is vital that we communicate with these individuals and others in their native languages. And of course, that means in those two cases, Spanish and Portuguese, neither of which I'm embarrassed to say I'm very proficient in at all. Some would argue I don't speak very good English, but that's perhaps my accent more than anything else. So communicating with all these Catholics, whether it's Spanish speaking, Portuguese, or the African nations with all their different languages and dialects, Asia, it's not just English. One has to communicate these ideas in, and that's a huge challenge for us all, certainly for us. You'll be pleased that I'm just going to conclude what I said 5 years ago. I cannot predict exactly what the world will look like in 10 years, but I am optimistic that CCA will still be with us, and that together we will have grown and expanded our work in the intervening period all over the globe, and even in the such difficult areas for us as, say, China, Russia, and other countries where Catholics and the Catholic faith have not always been made to feel welcome. But we should not ignore the millions of Catholics who live in such areas. Of course, since I wrote this, we've had the situation that one knows about with Russia and Ukraine, but I will not move on to talk about that in any detail. I wouldn't say that that wasn't the case when I wrote this. And I conclude by I'm confident that in 2029, for our centenary in 4 years' time now, we will have much to look back with pride over the last 10 years, from now till then, as we prepare to celebrate the centenary. So that's what I said then. This is where we are now. How does that message sound 5 years, 6 years later? And just after the 10th anniversary, as Daniel has told us, and William, of the publication of Laudato Si. Now, this brings me on now to the second part of the talk, which the more controversial bit. You've had a bit of a history, a bit of an understanding of our organisation. But the second part of the talk, when I say the words Catholic concern for animals as a philosophy or even a theology. Now, I'm quite happy to defend that statement, actually, against anybody. And I do sometimes, because people challenge it when I use it, and people challenge a lot of what we do or what we say. And Daniel has already explained how when you talk about things, people are challenged. Why shouldn't I eat meat? Why shouldn't I go to a bullfight? Why shouldn't I do whatever I want to do? When we challenge these things and ask them questions, we get some feedback and sometimes defensive responses. So what do I mean by this? And again, I'm going to quickly go back, if I may, to touch upon part of the presentation given by Daniel in a couple of the quotations of sections he used from Laudato Si. And these are the extracts in particular I want to talk about, was when he talks about section 211 and 217. Both come from chapter 6 of Laudato Si, which Pope Francis entitled ecological educational, so get it wrong, start again, ecological education and spirituality. That was the chapter 6. But clearly we're an educational charity in a spiritual context, so clearly that is a key chapter for us. And just remind colleagues of what Daniel said. 211 says there is a nobility in the duty to care for creation through little daily actions, and it is wonderful how education can bring about real changes in lifestyle. And that is what we try and do as Catholic Concern for Animals, the institution, the charity. We try and educate Catholics and any others who may be interested. They don't have to be Catholic to be a member of CCA or a supporter or engage with us. Any faith or none, we are happy to engage with people on the issues of animal welfare and animal advocacy and animal protection, even animal rights. But this section is critical for me because it puts the emphasis on the individual. What are they doing in their Catholic lives, their daily Catholic life that Daniel spoke about? It's not good enough, or isn't good enough for me, to say, well, it's the church's fault somewhere. The church somewhere is in Rome, or the church is in the cathedral, or the church is the bishop. If you're a Catholic, you are the church. The church famously is not a building. Everyone knows that. It's not a building. It's not St. Peter's in Rome. It's not even the major clergy, although obviously St. Peter's and the major clergy, including the Pope, are critical parts of the Catholic family. But the Catholic family is at 1.3 or 1.4 billion people. who identify as Catholics, who are baptized Catholics. So this 211 is very critical because it says, what are you doing in effect? What Pope Francis is saying is, what are you doing in your daily life to affect animals and to treat them well and to not to be cruel to them? So positively, what are you doing to make their lives better? Or on the less positive, what you're doing at the very least not to make them worse. And then regard to section 217, and I'm going to quote this in full. Daniel gave part of it. I'm going to quote it in full because I believe this is absolutely critical to understanding Laudato Si. So I think Laudato Si has in some ways, and Daniel has already mentioned one of my not always complaints, that a lot of people are focused on putting a solar panel on the parish church roof, and that's job done. You know, and well, no, it's not. It's not. It's doing something, and we should be grateful for solar panel rather than any other energy production. But it's not job done. But a lot of people are focused on the last 10 years on that energy production, energy reduction side of things. But it's not just that. And I'm going to quote the whole of what Pope Francis says in 217. If you bear with me, this is the quote now. The external deserts in the world are growing because the internal deserts have become so vast. This is heavy stuff. For this reason, the ecological crisis is also a summons to profound interior conversion. Again, he's talking to the individual Catholic here. It must be said that some committed and prayerful Christians, again, he uses Christians, not Catholic, very interesting. I repeat, it must be said that some committed and prayerful Christians, with the excuse of realism and pragmatism, tend to ridicule expressions of concern for the environment. Others are passive. They choose not to change their habits and they thus become inconsistent. And Daniel raised that issue of inconsistency with Christians. So what they all need is an ecological conversion. This is really strong stuff. Talking to individual Catholics, what they all need is an ecological conversion, whereby the effects of their encounter with Jesus Christ become evident in their relationship with the world around them. Living our vocation to be protectors of God's handiwork is essential to a life of virtue. Essential to a life of virtue. And I repeat what he said. And this is next line, the final sentence of Krilla. It is not an optional or a secondary aspect of our Christian experience. This is really powerful stuff from the Pope. So, I believe that chapter 6 of Laudato Si is crucial in many regards for understanding what Pope Francis really meant in his encyclical letter. It really meant that it's relevant for animal creation. Now, here's a bit of conjecture that again might prove controversial. People might have a view on this and want to ask in the Q&A. And it's, to use a good old British word, it's a bit of gossip. And it's rumoured, no one knows the truth of it, rumoured that Pope Francis is alleged to have said privately that the encyclical was not really an environmental document at all. But its real message, its key message, is his attempt to transmit that he believes that humans no longer see God as a creator. So it's a spiritual message, and in parts that I've outlined. Now, whether he said that or not, I certainly don't know. It is out there in blogsphere, if that's the right expression, our new digital world, that is what he's supposed to have said at some point. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But it's interesting. So this is critical and key when we see other living beings as mere objects. This is what he says. He said, actually did say this. Other living beings as mere objects subject to arbitrary human domination. We should not do that. We do not realize that the ultimate purpose, and again, Daniel has mentioned this, the ultimate purpose of other creatures is not found in us. Daniel mentioned that. It's not there. God finds them good in their own regard. They were created before humans and they were found to be good. So Pope Francis says that instead of viewing humanity as having dominion over the earth, we must see that everything is interconnected and that all of creation is a kind of universal family. Nature cannot be seen as something apart from humanity or merely the place where we live. That's a key message. And all Catholics need to understand it, need to be told it, need to think about it, need to, if they want to, question it, but then consider seriously what their individual Catholic responsibilities have to themselves, to other humans, but also to all of God's creation as the non-humans and other creation that Daniel mentioned in the world. It needs to be understood and transmitted. And often, for whatever reason, which I'm not, maybe another webinar will look into why it isn't transmitted, understood, it needs to be. So that is our Catholic heritage as we sit here. I think everyone's sitting down. But what about the future? I always gone about the future. What are we going to do tomorrow or this afternoon or this evening? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities for Catholics in respect to the non-human creation from now, from the end of this seminar, or while we're speaking? And I intend to close my talk briefly because I'm probably overrunning time. I normally do. I want to close by briefly looking at some of the animal advocacy welfare issues and posing some questions for this audience, if they wish to engage with them, that we might, and indeed some facts actually, that we might want to have time to discuss in the Q&A later on, which will form the second part of our talk. And the question is this, the big question. What does Catholic animal welfare look like in the era of Pope Leo, at a time of secularization, global instability, and war? Let's place our advocacy in the world in which we live. Always a key thing for me. So the question is, what does Catholic animal welfare look like in the era of Pope Leo, at a time of secularization, global instability, and war? Now, the election of a new pope is always a big thing for the world, not alone the Catholic family, but for the world, and we've seen that in recent months. And he's hasn't been in office that long, so his views on Catholic animal welfare are yet to emerge, frankly, and that presents opportunities and indeed possibly threats, but I think more opportunities. What I am delighted to see already is that he's held a special Care for Creation Mass in the Vatican. Now, I don't recall, and I'm stand to be corrected, but I don't recall Pope Francis doing that, actually, having a Care for Creation Mass in the Vatican. And he's clearly, Pope Leo, shown an intention to continue the environmental focus of Pope Francis and Laudato Si. But what does that mean in reality? What does that mean on the ground? What does it mean for day-to-day Catholics? How will Pope Leo combine his two roles? On the one hand, he's a spiritual leader of the 1.3, 1.4 billion Catholics, and in some cases a leader worldwide for non-Catholics. But also, he's a head of state. You know, he has to engage with presidents and others in a time of increasing war. The world is very unstable. We all know that. He talks about secular problems, and Pope Francis did in the quote from the encyclical I've just given you. We talk about religious, global financial instability. Now, 682 million people, that's 9% of the world's population, are living in extreme poverty right now. And I'll repeat that figure. 682 million people, 9% of the world's global population, are living in extreme poverty right now. They're surviving on less than £2 a day. £2 a day. Now, that's not, I'm not sure exactly what that would be in dollars, but roughly around the $2 mark, when it's slightly more. Another 3.5 billion people, now this is 44% of the world's population, 3.5 billion people are living on less than £5 a day. Nearly half the world living on £5 a day. Well, I can tell you in London now, you struggle to get a cup of coffee for that, basically. If you went to one of the coffee shops, the Starbucks, Coffee Nero, your Costas, all these, sure they have them elsewhere. But you've got, you know, certainly if you had a cup of coffee and a pastry, you wouldn't get them both of them for £5. And people are living off that a day, nearly half the world. Many of these people are living in sub-Saharan Africa, which has about 16% of the world's population, but almost 70% of those living in extreme poverty. That's again worth repeating. In sub-Saharan Africa, which is only 16% of the world's global population, but 70% of those people are living in extreme poverty. 2 billion people, which is about a quarter of the world's population, are now living in war and conflict zones. 2 billion people. And I won't, again, I haven't got time at this seminar, but I could do another one easily on animals in war zones. One of the great understated problems of our time are the animals in war zones. What does Catholic animal welfare fit in this situation? Where do we fit in when there's all these huge problems that people are trying to deal with? Daniel's mentioned factory farming, and he was talking about land-based factory farming. I could go on to aquatics and aquaculture, which is horrendous as well. And of course, that's a major concern for us as animal advocates, and people on this call have spent a lifetime working in this area, I know. But there are plenty of other things that worry us, or should do. We talked about theology. What does dominion mean even now? The start of Genesis. And nobody really, you ask 5 questions, 5 Catholics what dominion means, you'll get 5 different answers, I suspect. Very, very still uncertain in people's minds what their role is in relation to the non-human creation as outlined in Genesis. I mentioned in my talk 5 years about AI and speciesism. I mean, I'll go slightly off topic. I was told that in not that far distant future, and this is from informed sources, and I don't doubt their validity, that we'll all have microchips inside us like cats do and dogs do. And we'll be able to pay for all our services by microchip. You don't use your Apple phone anymore, or you just show your arm. Are we becoming a new species? What's happening with us? That's AI. Where will that be in 5-10 years? I certainly can't predict. We've got the climate emergency. That I can predict will get worse. Isn't getting better. Pope Francis' encyclical letter was written 10 years ago. It's been basically ignored by the world leaders. They paid it lip service. Oh, yeah, very important. But we all know what happened to the Paris agreements. We all know what's happening out there in the real world. Lip service has been paid to the climate emergency. Factory farming, but that's a huge problem. But it's not only farming in factories, it's diet generally and our use of animals as food and human poverty. How do we tell people who are in extreme poverty what they can and cannot eat when they're living off £2 a day? How do you do that? Morally say, well, you should be eating that, you should be a vegan, when they've got nothing to eat and they're starving, and people in the world are starving. A big moral dilemma for us, but it's a real one. Cruel sports. We haven't mentioned cruel sports. I mean, what you consider a cruel sport depends again on your individual. I personally consider horse racing a cruel sport. Now, I don't think I'd get much traction if I said that to the King of England. It's a royal sport, and his mother and the Queen, the previous Queen, was a great lover of horse racing. But I think it's a cruel sport. People have a different view, perhaps, on bullfighting, but we know, don't we, that Catholic bullfighting only goes on, the traditional Spanish bullfight, in Catholic countries. One of CCA's long-standing ambition is to rid the world of bullfighting, and we do what we can on that. War zones I've mentioned. If we try to calculate, and we can't, the amount of animals that die in war at the moment, it would possibly, and we're talking of billions of animals that are affected by land-based factory farming, trillions of aquatics that are affected by industrial farming and traditional wild fisheries. But it could be bigger, the number of animals that are affected in war zones. I don't know, and I don't think anyone can put a figure on it, the amount of animals that have died in the war zones of the world. Insects, other animals, tiny animals that are, when a bomb drops wherever it drops, I'm not going to differentiate between wars and get into a political debate on that. But when a bomb drops, it doesn't just kill the humans that are living there, does it? It kills everything that lives in there. Cages. We haven't talked about cages. aquatics, lots of stuff we could talk about. How do we deal with this? So those are the issues. I'm going to end up now by saying who are our audience we want to talk to. Well, clearly we have a 1.3, 1.4 billion Catholics who are our main audience. But then there's the Vatican as the institution and the Pope at the head of it. Catholic clergy worldwide, about 500,000 Catholic clergy, I believe, worldwide. Catholic educational establishments, 250,000, 250,000. There are actually 5 Catholic nations, surprisingly, still Catholic nations. They're very small ones: Vatican, Monaco, Liechtenstein and Malta, 4 of them. Costa Rica is a 5th. But Costa Rica's got very, very good environmental standards and history. So that's very interesting. And then, of course, there are the traditional Catholic nations that are not seen as Catholic nations anymore, but have significant Catholic populations. Brazil, 134 million, 65% of the population of Brazil Catholic. Mexico, 97 million, 83%. Philippines, USA, I could go on down the list. Italy, Colombia, France, Spain, all massive populations. And then DRC in Africa. So a huge, huge audience, lots of issues, lots of challenges. New Pope. Where are we going to go with the theology? How is he going to build on Laudato Si? Where do we fit in with all these horrible situations like the war? Where are we with the climate emergency? Where are we with this AI? Where's that going to take us? Lots of questions there. Hopefully a bit of history as well. Hopefully explaining what we do as well as what we have done. And I'm massively over time probably, William, so I'm going to stop.
Well, Chris, that was great. Let's turn it over to those who want to ask any questions.
Chris, I was wondering, what is your exact anniversary date? It might be similar to NAV's.
Oh God, that's a question that I'm going to have to struggle with. It's
Your centennial. What year is it?
I know the year. The exact date in 1929, I'll have to look up. I'll come back to you, Sally. We're 100 years old. We started in 1929. 100 years old in 2020. But the exact date, I'll have to check.
Oh, that's okay. Well, that's actually our centennial as well. So
wow.
Something to think about.
Obviously a great year for animal advocacy.
Excuse me.
Yeah, that is something to think about. Yeah. Maybe we could do some sort of joint project.
Yeah,
have?
it's intriguing.
We do have a question in the Q&A section if you guys would like to answer that from Mary.
Kayla, somebody, I think, raise a hand.
Is that me? Okay.
There you go.
I haven't really got a question. I thought, Daniel, your talk was quite amazing. Chris, I know you're always good. But I think as somebody who's sort of a bit of a lapsed Catholic and a floating voter, really, I sort of feel the Catholic Church is always known for having very conservative views on important issues such as gay marriage, etc., etc. And it would be really nice if the Catholic Church could be known for speaking up for animals. And I know you're doing your best, Chris and Barbara and so on, but Pope Francis began something good, but if you see the reactions to Laudato Si, from serious Christians of all kinds, it's all to do with the environment and caring for the earth. And the animal message has just been forgotten and ignored. I think Christians everywhere would sort of sit back and take notice if the Catholic Church was outspoken about our relationship with animals. So there's a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate it. I don't know what the question is. I guess it's more of a comment that you made. Yeah, I think when we talk about the Catholic Church, it's the slippery concept. So when you talk about the church, I guess you mean the Vatican or your local bishop or your local pastor. There are so many different levels of the church. So it's, yeah, I think it's my experience with that is we have this idea of like a trade-off, there's only so much airtime, there's only so much attention span that the faithful have, and we have, so many other pressing issues that, like for example, in the US, the most pressing issue right now is about immigration and the rights of immigrants. So I think in terms of what the church can speak about and cover and all of that, yeah, it's a tricky situation. Now, I believe you can obviously care for animals, like you can be vegetarian or vegan, and also care about the other injustices, right? It's not a zero-sum game. You just don't eat meat and then you go and do what it needs to be done. You can do other good things as well. But I think in what the church talks about, I don't have a good answer. As I said, I quoted some things from Laudato Si and the Catechism and the Eucharistic prayer. So we already have some things already out there. It's just not talked about and emphasized. Perhaps we can start with the people next to you in the pews, right? Or the people who come to your house for dinner. You can start a conversation over there and have a more bottoms-up approach.
Yeah, I think that is all very good what Daniel has said and quite correct. I'd also say, Joyce, that this partly why I concentrated on some of the things I said earlier. I think the church has said this in Laudato Si. I think the Pope has said it. It's just that other people have either blatantly ignored it for whatever reason or haven't understood it for whatever reason. But he has basically said that it is, going back, living our vocation to be protectors of God's handiwork is essential to a life of virtue. It is not an optional or secondary aspect of Christian experience. He said it blatantly there. Now, you could argue, and I would argue, and that not enough has been done by the church as an institution to promote these bits of Laudato Si. And as we said, and Daniel made, and I said, a lot of it is all about putting up solar panels. I mean, the amount of Laudato Si organizations that have come about in the last 10 years talking about solar panels. I mean, and of course, I'm not criticizing that because these things are important. When, I tried to get into that animal welfare, it was mind-boggling. But I think one of the things that I always get encouragement from is that the Vatican has never tried to limit anything that we have said or done. They've always said, you go on with what you do, what you want to do. You go and say what you want to say. And they've never tried to say, he's having a go at this, try and shut him down or anything. No, they've always let, whether for whatever reason, they've always supported us and let us get on with it. And they've sent senior cardinals to our webinars in the past. So I think the church has said it. I mean, and again, Daniel has said it. It's bits of the catechism. Again, you could criticize some of the catechism. It tends to go both ways, Arnold. It sort of sits in. I think the church and Scripture says it in parts, as well as Daniel has said. So I think it's there. It's just that perhaps it's not promoted enough, and a lot of it, I'm afraid, comes down. And Daniel has hinted at this. Sometimes the local individual bishops, clergy, in wherever you happen to be. Some clergy are more supportive of animal welfare than others. And I suspect that's the same in all sorts of issues in the Catholic Church, that some clergy are more supportive of Catholic social teaching on one issue than they are on another. And so I accept the case that the church should do more, and it should. But I think it's there. It just needs to be explained, which is what we try to do in our limited way. But I think it's there, frankly.
can I just ask, I mean, do you try to educate other, priests and bishops and so on?
Absolutely.
I am thinking, looking 20 years into the future, I think we have among us a very good future pope called Daniel Mascarenhas.
Wow. That would be promotion, wouldn't it? So we've had one Jesuit pope. We can have
You heard it here first, folks.
a second Jesuit pope. That'd be excellent.
There you go.
I do have a website called vegancatholic.org. I put some resources out there just as a way to approach the idea of veganism through a Catholic lens. So vegancatholic.org. I write a few essays. I make a few videos every now and then when I get a chance. So you can check it out.
What was it? A question in the chat I saw, I think.
There's a question in the
Yeah,
chat.
yes. There was a question by Mary Chin, who I think I can answer that maybe a little
Okay.
bit. She asks if Catholics and human beings are not supposed to consume animals as food, are all other animals not supposed to consume other animals as food as well? That's a great question. So
Mhm.
obviously, humans, we are made in the image of God, and so we have a higher responsibility. So there's a talk about like not talking about animal rights, but more like human duties, right? So with great power comes great responsibility. So we have rationality, and so we can think about what is right and what is wrong. We have ways of avoiding violence because we can cultivate our own food. A tiger is the digestive system of a tiger cannot handle grass, right? So the tiger has to eat meat. Also, a tiger cannot cultivate and grow soybeans or lentils. The tiger has to hunt for food. So I think if we look at it more from a sense of human duties rather than animal rights, so that's why I always talk about this idea through the discipleship of Christ, meaning when I profess discipleship of Christ, I'm aligning myself to a particular way of life, and I'm called to live that way. Now, whether a tiger wants to be a disciple of Christ, I don't know. A tiger doesn't have the capacity to not be violent towards deers, but humans have the capacity to be kind and compassionate because we can eat lentils and be just fine. I hope that was helpful. So think about it more as human duties rather than animal rights.
There's another question here.
Yeah, this is from Lisa. I'll pick this one up if I may, William, and have a go at this one. And
Yes.
this is a very good question. Again, as was Mary's. How can we support children who embrace animal-friendly perspectives that put them at odds with their parents? Well, first thing I'll say, perhaps quite glibly, is that at some stage, I think most children are at odds with their parents on something or other as they reach a certain age. But I don't mean to undermine the question by saying that. I think there's an issue. But here specifically, we're talking about children who perhaps want to change their diet, who live in a brought up as most children will be. I'll just go back to the point of veganism and diet. 99% of the planet is not vegan. 99%. So of every 100 people you meet, there's only one who's likely to be a vegan. So most children will live in families who eat meat. I mean, there's a few percentages more that are vegetarian, but still less than 10%. So over 90% of the planet are animal eating families. So if we have a child who suddenly, for whatever reason, and perhaps comes probably a child in their pre-teens or in their teenage years when they maybe start to think about things generally, want to change their diet or want to ask other questions, how do we support them in that when it might be a conflict with their parents' views? Well, I mean, I think that is a very difficult question to answer in regard of we can only support them in making them feel better when they engage with us. Obviously, their local environment, their schools, their friends will have views on this. But we would support them if they came to us, of course, by all sorts of different means on a one-to-one basis, regarding facts issues. Certainly in the case of diet. I mean, there's this myth out there that you cannot live on an animal-free diet. Well, if that was the case, I wouldn't be alive, and lots of old people on this call won't be alive either. And it's just a nonsense. Humans can live quite easily without consuming animals. But it's a myth there that, that you have to have animals, you have to have protein, or you have to have this, or you have to have that. So we can certainly help with facts about issues like that. We could certainly act if there were more issues regarding some of the cruelty issues we've talked about. For example, I'll use this example because it's quite relevant in the UEA. Horse racing. Is horse racing a cruel sport? Should I go to the zoo? Is it right? I don't want to go to the zoo, Mummy and Daddy. I think it's cruel. All these issues we can give facts and figures and advice about if approached. I don't know if that helps or not answering the question.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that one? So I have a question. I think I mentioned in my introductory remarks that I came across these 10 Green Commandments. And the thing that got my attention was that after reading the 224-page book, that I also looked to see how much coverage this thing got in the press. And what I was surprised at was how little coverage it actually got. There was only one conference that I could find in Chicago. It's a pretty well documented book. And I guess I would ask you, Daniel or Chris, if you guys have come across this before. And, what do you think was the reluctance as to why didn't it get more coverage? I mean, the person who wrote this, it was also a right-hand person to Pope Francis. He wrote it in 2019.
I know the book. What I would say, and some people on the call will not be surprised at this. Some people who may not know me may be surprised. Is we often, and going back to the answer I gave previously about, I think the stuff is there for Catholics. It's just not promoted enough, perhaps. Is we sometimes forget the opposition out there and the power of the opposition. When you're talking about, for example, going back to not the animal issue, but going back to the solar panel issue, when you imagine the power of the oil and gas industry, the energy producers, the power, not only the power that but the power behind, power behind the scenes, the trillions of dollars they have at their beck and call to try and stop things that they don't agree with and promote things that they do. We often underestimate the strength of that. So most people who try and promote what we would say our way of thinking are struggling against those massive, huge international, multinational corporate interests often. And I'll give you an example, not specifically on this book, because I can't say why the book hasn't been better well known, but I'll give you an example which resonates in the United States as well as the United Kingdom, which is an issue, again, we've not mentioned today, but it's a big animal welfare issue, which is trophy hunting. Now, the United States has a very, very strong trophy hunting lobby, lots and lots of money, and do all they can to promote and support the trophy hunting industry in Africa, but not only in Africa. Trophy hunting goes on in other places, but in Africa in particular, it's been a big issue because the big animals are seen to be killed. Lions, Cecil Lion case a number of years ago in particular. And so the UK Parliament has been trying to ban the importation of trophy hunting parts, in effect, parts of animals that people have killed, tried to ban importation into the UK. And the interesting thing here is that there's no political controversy in the UK over this issue. 90% plus of the political institutional, i.e. the Parliament, are supportive of making a ban. But it hasn't been able to get through yet. And the reason why is it sailed through the House of Commons with all cross-party support, gets to the House of Lords, which is quite difficult in some ways to manage. And I'm aware, for example, that the United States hunting lobby has put in excess of over £1 million to try and stop this ban in a UK Parliament behind the scenes. Over £1 million. Don't know what that is in dollars. And there's probably that figure's probably underestimated the actual amount of money that's been spent to try and stop a piece of legislation in UK. It's not in the US, it's not US legislation, UK legislation. But the hunting lobby in the US have funded the opposition. And that, of course, people don't know that. They just look at the politicians and say, why haven't you banned trophy hunting? They're not aware of what goes on behind the scenes. So the point I'm making with this, I said, I don't know the reason why that book hasn't been better known and had more seminars and conferences about it. But we sometimes underestimate the opposition that we face. And that may or may not be relevant in this case. I don't know.
Daniel, you want to take the other question from Mary Chin?
The follow-up question, yeah, I sort of answered it in brief in the text. So Mary Chin is saying there's not less life in plants, just that most don't respond to affection the way we are to expect. So if I mustn't eat animals, then I mustn't eat plants as well. Well, so humans have to eat something. So in the fallen world, we have to consume something or the other. So we have to eat plants or animals. And Mary's contention is that plants are alive as well. Yes, plants are alive. But I think it's a different level of sentience. So if we have to eat something, we should probably eat something that's on a lower level of sentience. Now, it is possible that plants might also be intelligent and we just don't know how to recognize it. It is possible. Unlikely, but possible. I cannot rule it out. We cannot know everything. But our own experience and science, at least the science that we have access to, shows that animals have a higher level of sentience than plants, right? Brain activity, or even if you kick a dog versus if you kick a tree, we have the experience, or we can empathize with the pain of a dog. We don't empathize with the pain of a tree because we don't see the pain. There might be pain, I'm not denying it, that is possible. But as far as we know, a dog feels a lot more pain and suffering than an oak tree. And so so the best action we can do is to avoid harming a dog and perhaps consume from trees and plants instead. So it's more like we are operating out of a principle of lower harm. And as far as we know, we don't know everything, obviously, but as far as we know, given what we know, what is the best action? The best action is not to harm animals, but maybe we can harm plants instead because we have to consume something.
Yeah, if I could just add to that and agree with that, it is a very difficult question. I've been posed this a number of times over the years, and the answer is similar to what Danny. I have to eat something or I will die, and I do have a duty to try and preserve my own life, as you know, if I'm leaving like my Christian and Catholic upbringing, I have a duty to preserve my own life, and therefore, if I don't eat, I will die. So I have to eat something. So it is a very difficult one. I understand the question. I emphasize with the question, and the answer I'm giving perhaps isn't altogether the best, but it's the only one I really have. Is
the other thing that the question has to be taken in its broader context, and that is when we actually eat animals, we kill more plants than anything else. We destroy tremendous environments while we're doing so. So that it's not as if it's an if or. You know, eating a plant-based diet will definitely be a lot better for the environment, a lot better for nature than a meat-based diet. I mean, there's a lot of information on that that people can naturally read and see and make their case if they want to continue, because people will come up all the time and come up with this argument. There's another question in here, I think from,
May I just come in on that one?
yeah.
May I just come in?
Yes.
Because actually, over 70% of the world's soya plants go to animal feed,
Yes,
and probably
yes.
over 40% of
Right.
maize, wheat, corn, whatever you want to call it. So actually, by eating directly plants, you're not killing as much as you do,
Yes, right.
not killing as many plants
Yeah.
as if you eat meat. And I just want to add a quick thing about AI, because I've been reading various bits and pieces, and there are more books and papers about this. And obviously AI could do many, many, many things. And they're even talking about AI becoming sentient. But one thing it can do is help to translate animal language into human language, if you like. And they're already working on this with pod of sperm whales. They've managed to decipher over 140 different sounds. They don't yet know exactly what they mean, but
Right.
this is where AI could be helpful. And it may be that AI could become very helpful to us in the future, because it could tell us what the hens in the cages are saying and the pigs in the crates and so on.
And can I just add something in there? I mean, we have a duty not to cause suffering, and when we farm and kill animals and do other things to them, we're causing them to suffer. And we know that animals have a brain and a central nervous system, and we don't have any evidence that plants have that. I'm not saying they don't have some senses, they obviously do, and there's some wonderful research into how trees communicate with each other through their roots and the fungus underground. There's a lot of amazing things, but as far as we know, these are only chemical reactions. What we do know is that animals, and we're talking about fish and maybe insects as well, do have a brain and a central nervous system, and they've evolved along the same path as we have. And therefore, we know that we are causing them to suffer. And causing them to suffer is the sin that we are trying to avoid.
A question here from Nabatu Resti. Chris?
Right, I'm just reading it now, William. Right, well, firstly, hi, Resti. I'm delighted you're here. Resti is one of our Catholic colleagues in Uganda, who I know we've met numerous times when I've been over to Uganda working. And the question she's written is, given that the situation here in developing countries, many people are poor and find themselves destroying nature, especially not respecting the environment and animals because they are looking for survival, resorting to factory farming, caged, etc., so as to produce food for their survival. What did we miss in this contest? So to try to curb down the rapid climate change and protecting animals. Now, that is a very, very wide question and very valid. And in fact, when I was in Uganda with Resti and her colleagues a few months ago, we spent a lot of time on an island in Lake Victoria. And the Bishop of Masaka Diocese, where Resti lives, had asked me to combine discussions and talks with young people and the Catholic community and the local fishermen about the environment and the effect of the environment and climate change and animals. So all these things are absolutely interrelated. And one thing I would say is, and I know we talked about veganism, and Daniel's got his website, and we've talked about diet a lot and farming. One thing I will never do, and CC I hope will never do, is tell people what they can and cannot do with their lives. I cannot go and tell somebody who's living in very poor conditions what they can and cannot eat, and that they must be vegan. Because it is crazy. Now, factory farming, I mean, what I would say, Resty, is when you and I have discussed it when I've been over there, how a lot of the food, the animals that are eaten by the local population are not factory farmed. They're chickens that are running around, and goats that are tethered, and of course in Lake Victoria, a long tradition of fishing. And I hope that if people have to eat animals, and I accept in some situations they probably do, they will source the animal from that sort of farming basis rather than the factory farming we're seeing. But of course, I also saw when I was there, certainly in some of the larger towns, your ubiquitous chicken shops and things that you can see in the West as well. So and one of the great pollutants of Lake Victoria is the infamous Pepsi Cola bottle. I saw more Pepsi plastic bottles, not only Pepsi themselves, but all their other things that they put in their plastic bottles. I mean, the lake shore was covered in them. So we have plastic pollution, and this, and it obviously Pepsi are massive in Uganda. Interesting, obviously they marketed Uganda better than Coke. I didn't see a Coca-Cola advert anywhere, but Pepsi were everywhere, and their plastic bottles refuse was everywhere. But going back to try and answer the question, Resty, is that hopefully you and your colleagues can resist the growth of factory farming in Uganda and elsewhere. I'm well aware that aquatic aquaculture is on the growth in Uganda, and that is being funded by the Chinese. The Chinese, if people don't know, are the biggest fish farmers in the world, and they're exporting their fish farms wherever they can and building new ones, and they're doing that in Uganda. I know that. But so hopefully we can resist in parts of the world that haven't got major factory farms, new ones developing. And if people do have to eat animals, and for whatever reason they use ones that have a flourishing life, at least in some regard, and are not caged in the horrible ways we know about, and people on this call could explain in detail. Finally, on the point of plants and the world in which we live, and I mentioned that to me it's important when you do animal advocacy, you take account of the world in which you live, which is why I'm talking about war a lot at the moment. Is that I mentioned the Chinese in Uganda, and the Chinese are everywhere in Africa, not only Uganda. But one of the problems for Lake Victoria fishermen and the fishing communities is deforestation. And the children in Uganda, the primary school children, talk to me about deforestation. Now, that was incredible. If I talk to a class of 5 or 6 year olds in Britain, they will never mention the word deforestation. But the children in Uganda are living with it because, and the fishermen explained this to me why. One of the things that has happened on this particular island, and it's not unique, it's happened in other parts of Lake Victoria, is that the Ugandan government have done a deal with Indian producers, palm oil producers, and the palm oil producers have come in, cut down all the native trees, which sheltered against wind, were naturally there and sheltered against some of the winds to protect the environment. Cut them all down and built plant trees everywhere, palm trees, sorry, everywhere, to produce palm oil. They're everywhere, huge palm oil plantation. And those trees, of course, are not as good at helping against the wind. So the local communities are having higher winds, higher problems protecting their shelters and their homes against increased wind challenges on the lake because of deforestation. So that's another example where the environment is being badly affected by, and of course, we know that palm oil isn't good for the environment as itself, but also is it not good in itself, the product. The actual planting of the plantations is damaging the human population because of less shelter and less wind control. I hope that helps, Resty. I'm not sure. Long-winded answer to your question.
Yeah, if I may just add a little bit. So I grew up in India. I'm in India right now. I think with poorer countries, I've also spent some time in Guatemala. And I would say yes, if there is no other option, if animals are the main source of protein, then yes, like human nutrition matters. I remember when I was in Guatemala, I used to go for meals. I was learning Spanish, and I used to go to meals at a local family, like a small house near the school, and they were paid by the school to feed the students, and so part of my fees would go to the family, and they would give food. And in my very broken Spanish, I told the woman in the house that I don't eat meat. And it took some time to convince her that, yes, I'm choosing not to eat meat. And she was very happy because she was getting the same amount of money. And the vegetarian food, which is beans, rice, and vegetables, was about 1/10 the price because meat is really expensive in Guatemala. And so she was very happy that I was not eating meat. And I told her that it's my choice and I won't tell the school so she can keep all the money. And it's not my business to tell her to get less money. So meat is really expensive, I think, in most places in the world. And yeah, so if it is the only option for nutrition, then obviously human life matters. But most of the places I know about, so India, US, Guatemala, meat is more of a delicacy or something to feast on, right? It's not a necessity. And so I think we can always think about it through a lens of necessity. So the quotation I got from the Catechism says, it is, it's against human dignity to cause animals to suffer unnecessarily. So if it is necessary, if it's a need, then it's fine. But we have really asked the question, is eating meat in a particular situation a need, or is it a delicacy or a cultural tradition?
Yeah, and again, I think that's absolutely correct. And I could just add in the experience in Uganda when I stayed with Resty and her colleagues with the local priests. They fed me. When I first went, the first time I went and explained that I was vegan, I remember Resty's and the local priest being a bit surprised, but they fed me properly without having to have meat, and we all ate the same. So wherever you are, it is probably possible to try and survive on a diet of plant-based diet. The issue is that, going back to my earlier points, the opposition we have, the people who are promoting the meat, have much more resource and money available to promote their product than we have to oppose their product, whether it's trophy hunting or diet. And they're constantly telling people and trying to reduce the price by factory farming, of course, that their product is what people should be eating. And of course, one of the reasons why, and again, this is not commonly known often, I said that 1% of the planet is vegan. That 1% is decreasing year on year. It's not increasing. The 1% vegan of the planet is decreasing. And that's because places like China, and to a lesser extent India, more and more people are eating meat, because as the wealth of those two big countries increases, they're demanding meat where in the past they couldn't possibly afford it. The growth of the so-called middle class in China dwarfs the population of the United Kingdom in total, despite the population growth in China. And a lot of those people are demanding to have meat now. So it's an ongoing battle. And of course, going back to, again, the point I made about Laudato Si, and I think it's actually in there in Catholic social teaching. The Pope says that, we have to think about these things as an individual Christian on a daily basis, how we connect with the non-human world. And one of the questions we raise, and I said I'm never going to tell anybody what they should do, but one of the questions is, we pose a question: do you need to eat meat? Why do you eat meat? Is it your background? What's the case? Is it we were brought up? And of course, 99% of the world will have been brought up to eat meat. So it's a big cultural change to stop eating. Often we sometimes underestimate the profound change it takes for people to suddenly change their behavior, especially as something as basic as their diet. It's not a small thing. But, you know, we just need to plug away and explain to people that animals are God's creatures. Animals demand on God's behalf, or God demands on behalf of the animals that we treat them with respect, and we treat them as friends. And most people I know don't eat their friends, you know. And I was explaining I was talking to Barbara earlier, and I said, you know, one of the examples I often use is, you know, you don't eat your friends, or you know, you wouldn't say, oh, my next door neighbour's lovely, but I'm having it for breakfast tomorrow. You know, you wouldn't do that. You know, you don't eat your friends. So, you know, why? And one of the things I often say about the UK, which, and Joyce has heard me say this many times, I'm sure Barbara has, you know, this country that I live in really infuriates me when they say we're a nation of animal lovers, but 3 times a day they eat them. You know, that's not, you don't eat your friends that you love. But most UK citizens eat their so-called friends that they love, with animal lovers, and they have them for breakfast, lunch and dinner. So diet is a huge issue, of which factory farming is a major part, but only a part. It's the actual thing of how do you engage with people to explain that these are God's creatures and are not there for your use, and you can eat other things and be healthy and live a good diet without eating animals.
Can I
So
just
picking up
add
on that-
something? In 2022, Pope Francis was talking to young people, a great
Mhm.
big gathering of the young, and he said in certain areas of the world too, it will be appropriate to consume less meat. This too can help save the environment. So, you know, that was Pope Francis.
Yeah. I mean, I know I'm repeating myself, and other people would disagree with this, but I think it's in there. I think Catholic social teaching, if read properly, if focused upon, and if communicated to the Catholic world population, it's there. It's just for whatever reason, people are focused on other parts of the encyclical, either deliberately or not deliberately, and missed these critical bits, from our perspective anyway.
So picking up on what you both are saying, there's actually a comment in here talking about the 800th anniversary of the Canto of Creation that's coming up. The feast day is October 4th, which again is only one day, but could be the beginning of maybe doing this on a more consistent basis to talk about not just the blessing of the animals, but use other saints that we know were vegans and vegetarians, and using their their feast days as a way to remind people in the parishes, which is getting back to the original point that was being made in the article, which is we have to get to the pews and talk to people about, why we should be not harming animals. And the one thing we could do is adopt a plant-based diet. You don't have to do it every day. Just do it maybe one day a week, or begin. So do it slowly.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And it's not only diet, William. I know we concentrate on diet because of the amount of animals that suffer, land-based and aquatics, in animal food, in food production for humans of animals. But again, it's the issues of war. I mean, the amount, we don't think about the animal suffering in this war. I mean, all of us on this call probably day in, day out have seen the wars as on the headlines, wherever part of the world they're in. Hardly ever, if at all ever, does anyone mention the suffering of animals in those conflicts. Ever. And it's just not considered. And again, discussions about, as an individual Catholic, not only what do I eat, but what do I participate in cruel sports in some way by watching him, or do I, whatever else the issue is, what's my involvement, if any, in these things? So it's a whole thing as an education that people just, you know, the key thing for CCA is to try and engage with people and say, what in your life is your engagement with animals, and is it good or is it bad? That's fundamentally it. And can you change your lifestyle to make it better? You know, pretty blatant. And as Daniel said, people don't like having those questions raised. They don't like to even think about it because it makes their life difficult. You know, it makes them think about things they prefer not to think about.
Well, we've reached the 1 o'clock hour. Any other,
Right.
Daniel, anything, Barbara, or anybody else who wants to make a comment, or before we kind of put a close to this?
Yeah, I think my final comment is as Catholics, it's always about discipleship of Christ. So it's not about having an agenda or trying to force people to do something or the other.
Mhm.
I just want to reiterate the whole point about being vegan or caring for creation is because it is a way to be disciples of Christ. That is what this is about for me personally. And I think that's what I always go back to when I talk about this difficult topic, that I'm speaking about it through the lens of discipleship of Christ.
I mean, one of the things I've been thinking about is, as I listen to all of you and as I reflect on this, is probably to follow up with you in some way and ask you different ways in which perhaps, other things that we may have missed. I mean, after all, this topic is a big topic. Other things that we can that we can do, and the collaboration that even Sally was here for a little while from the National Anti-Vivisection Society. I know there are other groups that were on here that might be able to do some other things in the future. Again, probably expand on this. So anyway, I want to thank you all, of course, for taking your time and being part of this Care for Creation webinar. Thank you for all the support and for all the great discussion. And of course, we'll share all the recording and the questions that have been posed here. And have a blessed day.
Thank you. Bye all.
Bye all.